Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming back. This week we've been talking about experimental studies, and I've been giving some lectures about various aspects of experimental studies. Now, what we'd like to do is to give you an opportunity to critique a published paper using that used an experimental design. And what I've asked is my good friend, Julie BURING, a fellow epidemiologist, to lead this discussion. I've known Julie for many years. We were students together. She is currently teaching an introductory epidemiology course here at the school, which is very similar to what I'm doing here. But what today I've asked Julie to do is to talk about a particular paper that she's going to ask you to read. Also, you've seen Julie already. She's been giving some of the lectures on a large experimental study that she and her colleagues are doing here at Harvard. But today, it's the aim is to take you through a paper that we're going to ask you to read, and then after that, we're going to ask you to go to the student discussion forum and answer some questions that she's going to pose to you. So, as a group, you can discuss this paper. And then later on, she's going to come back and give you her answers to those questions, as well as incorporating some of the comments that you've had. So, Julie, before we start, can you tell us, when did you ever decide to become an epidemiologist? What drove you to enter this field? If you can give us some background about that, and then take us through the paper you want us to discuss. So, Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fran. Actually, I had never even heard the word epidemiology until I went to graduate school. So in college, at Pomona College in California, I was a math major, but I was always interested in math applying it to something. So I started to do statistics. And when I graduated, I wanted to go on and get a degree, graduate degree in biostatistics. So I went to the University of Washington in Seattle. I got my master's there, but I realized again that I wanted to be able to apply those tools to the design, conduct, and interpretation of studies. So in fact, I changed into the field of epidemiology, which to me was very much like medical detectives, trying to sort out how we would ever know why one factor or how one factor affected the risk of developing an outcome. I came back to the Harvard School of Public Health. I got my doctorate in epidemiology here, and I've been in this community ever since. I'm a professor of medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, and a professor of epidemiology at the Harvard School of Public Health. In terms of my research focus, what I'm really most interested in is the concept of prevention. What can someone do who doesn't have a disease yet, a chronic disease like cardiovascular disease and cancer? What can they do to reduce their risk of getting those diseases for the very first time? And whether it be taking a vitamin supplement, I'm wondering whether that will make a difference or not, changing their lifestyle, avoiding an environmental exposure, what can we do to reduce our risk of developing chronic disease for the very first time? And to accomplish that, I have been working primarily with randomized clinical trial methodology, where basically you take a large group of people and you divide them into two subgroups. One who actually gets the active intervention, like a vitamin or eating a particular way, and the other group does not get that intervention. And you compare the two groups over time and see whether they differ in terms of the number of outcomes that they got that are of interest to you. So that's the methodology I've been using. And for today, when we're actually going to be critiquing an article, I chose a randomized clinical trial that was of a very practical question that many of us have asked ourselves over time. In particular, if I have to put on a Band-Aid and I want to remove that Band-Aid, will it hurt me less if I remove it rapidly or if I remove it slowly? And that's sort of the question that the trial that we're going to talk about today is trying to answer. So the particular article that you will be reading is called Fast versus Slow Band-Aid Removal, a randomized trial. It's actually an article that comes out of Australia, and I picked it for two reasons. I picked it because when we were reading it, we would certainly identify with the issue the question that they are asking, and I think we'll also recognize that randomized trials can be used to answer a whole host of questions. So it can be a drug, it can be a lifestyle, it can be a way that we live, such as this article. So to really recognize the contribution of randomized clinical trials and clinical research. The other thing that I want to do through the questions that you're going to be looking at and thinking about is to recognize the key features of the design, the conduct, and the interpretation and analysis of randomized trials. So just for a second, let me set the stage for this trial that you're going to be reading, the fast versus slow Band-Aid removal. It is a randomized trial comparing two groups, fast Band-Aid removal, which is called FBAR, and slow Band-Aid removal, which is SBAR. They used a study population, which is actually just a convenience sample. The study was done in Australia. They went to James Cook University Medical School there. They took 65 volunteers from the second and the third years of medical school, and that was their population. Then they applied an intervention. They put on the participants medium-sized Band-Aids. This size, medium-sized Band-Aids, the kind of Band-Aid that we use very, very often. And they applied them bilaterally, so they applied them on the left side as well as the right side in 3 body locations where we often have Band-Aids, on the arm, on the hand, and on the ankle. And the intervention was to have this Band-Aid on and then to remove it in what they called a crossover design. So every person had 2 Band-Aids on their arm, 2 Band-Aids on their hand, 2 Band-Aids on their ankle. They removed both of the Band-Aids on the arm. One of them was removed fast, one of them was removed slowly. And they randomized them to which arm would have the fast or the slow removal. And so it's called a crossover because it's the same person that had both of the interventions, the fast versus the slow, and it's randomized because you didn't always just do the right arm first and the left arm second. You were randomized to which one would be removed. And then they went ahead and followed the individuals to see which arm, which hand, which ankle the participants felt had the less pain, the one that was fast removal or the one that was slow removal. So again, if I could ask Fran to come up for just a second, I will just show you how they actually did the study. So on the arm, they put on a Band-Aid. In a crossover design, which means that Fran's other arm was the other group in the study, we put on another Band-Aid in the exact same location. We put it on nice and tight, with all the little hairs that are underneath it that ought to drive Fran crazy when I pull this off. I would be randomized to one arm being removed slowly and one fast, but for now I'm just going to pick one and do it. The fast removal is that you pick up the Band-Aid and just rip it off as fast as you can. The slow removal is that you do it steadily, but over a 2-second period. So for the slow removal...
Hey guys, before she does this, you'll notice I am one of those hairy individuals. I have hair over my entire body except the top of my head, the bottom of my feet, and my palms, and she has really chosen hairy parts of my body, and Julie is a good friend, so that's why I'm willing to do this. This is active learning at its extremes. Okay, Julie, so
okay.
Should I close my eyes so I don't know what you're doing?
You can do whatever
I want.
you want. So for the fast one, first I have to get an edge to it. Clearly I have put this down tightly. A second. Okay, we're going to take it off quickly. Okay. Got a few little hairs on the back of that one. And this one is the slow one, so it is steady over a 1/1000 to 1,000. And then we would ask Fran to fill out a questionnaire in which he would say whether he had less or more pain, or actually more precisely, after I took it off quickly, he would fill out what the pain level was associated with that. And after I did the other one slowly, he would give me what the pain level was associated with that.
So try this on your own. Get a friend to put 2 Band-Aids on, a good friend, and let that good friend take it off in the 2 ways and see how you would react differently. Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome. All right. So before we were ready to say, and let's say that Fran said, I was just reading his face at that moment, so I would think he liked the fast one, less pain than the slow one. Let's say that's what the data said that he reported. Before we would be ready to say that fast Band-Aid removal had a lower pain level than slow Band-Aid removal, I think that there would be a number of questions that we would want answered, or we would want to look at either in the paper or talking to the investigator. So what I've done here is note 12 of those questions that I think would be like a framework of how we would go through this paper. And each one of them will sort of deal with a different aspect of the paper so we can judge it. We can see what the investigators did. We can also look at whether we feel that that was adequate or not, or whether in fact that led to some problem that we need to take into account in the interpretation of the findings. So the first question would really be why? Why did the investigators do this study? The first thing that we'd want to understand is, let's say they did this study in 2011. In 2011, what was the evidence about the relationship about fast removal of Band-Aids and slow removal of Band-Aids with respect to pain? Is this the first study that's ever looked at it? Is it the first randomized trial that's ever looked at it? Have people looked at it in different ways, but not this particular question in terms of whether there's less pain or not? So when they started the study, what was the current state of knowledge? So the current state of knowledge of the evidence about Band-Aid removal and pain. And probably even more important than that, when I try to look at a study, what was the gap in knowledge? So probably there was some evidence about this previously. Maybe not. Maybe this is the first study. But if there was some evidence, what had they shown, and what was the next piece of information that needed to be shown? So the gap in knowledge that this study is supposed to fill. That would be my first question, to get an idea of the context, the totality of evidence on this question. And then I would look at the participants in the study. We said that there were 65 healthy volunteers. Why did they pick the number 65? Why didn't they pick 200? Why didn't they say they could do this with 10 healthy volunteers? That makes a tremendous difference in terms of the logistics, the cost, the personnel of doing the study. Why did they pick the number that they did? How did they decide how many people to enroll in the study? On what basis did that make the decision? And what is the impact of that in terms of the interpretation of the findings? Third question now, let's go to the exposure. Remember we said it was fast removal versus slow removal. And I just sort of said roughly, you take it off very quickly or you take a couple seconds to do it. But what was the working definition of the interventions? Fast Band-Aid removal, FBAR, and slow Band-Aid removal, SBAR. And how did they make sure that this SBAR and FBAR were done exactly the same in all 65 of the participants, times 2 organs each time, 2 arms, 2 ankles, 2 hands. So obviously the person didn't do it that has the Band-Aids on them. Did the investigator do it for everybody, or did he have a staff that did it? If the staff did it, how did they do it in a uniform way? And are we comfortable that it was done in a uniform way? And it wasn't just that one person's slow removal was very different than another person's slow removal. How were they assigned to the intervention of fast removal versus slow removal? What exactly was randomized? And how did they learn which one was supposed to be first, or which arm, or whether it was fast or was going to be slow? How did they get that information? Who gave them that information? How was it done? What was the main outcome of the study? We said pain, but how was pain measured? And was it measured in a reliable way? Was it measured in a consistent way for all the participants? So however they did it, did they do it in a way that instilled confidence in us, that this was a reproducible, consistent way to look at the outcome in this study? What was the main result of the trial? And now let's talk about how to interpret that result. What about the result just being due to chance? Maybe we pretty much saw that, some of the people said that fast was less painful than slow. But maybe if there was really no difference between fast and slow at all, you're not necessarily going to get an even number of people that report each one as being better. So how do you know that the results you actually saw were not simply due to the luck of the draw or sampling variability? How did they measure that in the study, and are you convinced that it's a statistically significant finding, not just something due to the luck of the draw? And then if we showed overall whatever the result was, as we said before, it looked like pain was reduced in the fast removal. But is that true for everybody? Or were there some characteristics of the participants that made it be that fast versus slow is better depends on the characteristics of the participants? So is there effect modification? Was the effect of fast versus slow on pain level dependent on any characteristics of the participants, which would mean that when we make a recommendation later, we would recommend something differently, fast or slow differently, depending on the person who is asking us the question. Now we go beyond the study just a little bit and we talk about how to generalize the findings. Let's say now you've read that article, you mention to a friend that you've read an article about Band-Aids, and you tell them among these 65 volunteers what the results were. And your friend says to you, but wait a minute, I'm a parent and I really have wanted to know the answer to this question, because what happens when my child has a Band-Aid on? Is there anything in this article that would be relevant to me in terms of whether for my child I should remove the Band-Aid quickly or slowly? So what would you tell your friend, who is the parent of a small child? And more broadly, to whom can the results of this study be generalized? And on the other side, to whom can the results not be generalized? So we have a very clear idea to whom these results are applicable and when we have to stop in terms of our recommendation based on what we saw in this article. And then let's go back a little bit to the beginning of the design of the study. Think a little bit about the ethical considerations of doing this study or any trial. What was it that the investigators had to think about at the very beginning in terms of regulations, in terms of guidelines related to ethics? And these would be guidelines that would protect the investigators, but would also, and most importantly, protect the participants in the study. What did you see in the paper that were aspects of the study that they built in or regulations that they had to go through that were direct consequences of considering the ethical considerations of this study? And then finally, two last questions. We know a little bit now about how to design a trial. Fran went through the basic principles, and we're going to be talking about some of them as we go through these questions. Is there anything you would have done differently if this were your question and you wanted to answer the question about whether it was better to do fast versus slow removal of Band-Aids? Is there anything about the study that you would have built in, that you would have changed, that you felt might have lowered the limitations of the study or made it just a fuller, richer study? What would you have done differently? And finally, the very last question, do you think the question about speed of Band-Aid removal and pain is now answered? Did this trial answer that question? And when we say answer, we mean, is there, I don't care whether slow or fast is better. I just want a definitive answer to the question. Either clearly one is better, so I now can make a recommendation to others about this, or in fact, definitively there is no difference between the two, which is a finding in itself, because it basically says, don't worry about it, don't try to do it one way or another, just get it done. And this is what is supported by the evidence from this trial. So do you think the question is now answered, or do you think another investigation would be necessary to answer it definitively? And if so, what would that investigation be? So I think that these are the questions that we really need to answer over this next period of time while you're reading the article. And I very much look forward to seeing the thoughts and the arguments that you put forward on the discussion forum. And my username is Julie B, Julieb, and I'm going to be very pleased to be reading what you are writing, and at some point coming back to talk about what I think are the answers to these questions, but in light of the thoughts that you have put forward on the discussion forum. Thank you very much.